I am the Institutional Review Board Chair here at NPS. That probably means nothing to you. But what it means is that if you decide that you want to collect data from the source, whether that's human or pre-collected data, then you'll have to come to the NPS Institutional Review Board to do that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that process today. I'm going to start off the presentation with 3 slides that talk about 3 different research questions that are actually ongoing right now here at NPS. First one, where are the SWOs in the room? All right, see some SWO hands. How do ship manning levels affect sailor performance? So if that's a question you are interested in asking and finding the answer to, one way you might go about doing that is to look at how you might collect data on sailors on ships that are deployed. So we have researchers here at NPS that are looking at collecting actigraphy data. Actigraphy data is when you put a little wrist device, sort of like a Fitbit, but way more expensive on an individual and way more accurate than a Fitbit. Or you might collect cortisol levels. So we've had researchers go out and ask sailors on board ships to spit into little tubes. And we collect the samples and we come back, we analyze them, and we're looking to see if your arousal levels, your cortisol levels change from one part of the day to another, or from the beginning of a deployment to the end of a deployment. Same thing with something we call telomeres. Telomeres, if you don't know, are the end caps on your DNA. And as you're put under stress for long periods of time, those DNA end caps begin to shorten. And shortening telomeres are an indication of not only stress, but also of aging. So if we send you out on a 6-month deployment, have we actually aged you by 9 months or 12 months as a result of that deployment? Or we can look at reaction times to see if over a period of time your reaction times slow down because you are fatigued, stressed out, or whatever. So one way to collect data would be actually going out and recording human performance with objective types of measures such as cortisol levels, telomeres, and so on and so forth. Another question you might ask is, how in the world do officer selection boards make their decisions? So I got this picture off of the internet this morning, and I actually put in there officer selection boards, and nothing came up that looked remotely like an officer selection board, because it's a hugely private and mysterious process. I was in the Army for 30 years, never sat on one, and whoever I talked to that had been on one said they weren't allowed to talk about it, so we have no idea how they take place. But here's an enlisted one, and apparently that's okay for everyone to see and to talk about. So how would you go about collecting information on officer board selection? Well, there's a thesis that's actually about to start sometime next week, I believe, where an individual is going to be able to observe, actually sit in the room while the process of making selections is underway. This student will get to observe that process, as well as interview the board members, and then after the fact also send out surveys to other people who have sat on similar boards to see how their selection process was made. So great ways to go out and actually gather information and then to be able to write about it to answer a question such as, how do officer selection boards make their decisions? Third way, and this is one that's actually ongoing now as well, how do service member deployments affect their children's performance in school? So you deploy for a while, families left at home, children are responding to that in ways you may or may not even understand or see. And so how does that manifest itself? Well, one way to go about doing it, which is what this particular research project is about, is getting what we call pre-collected data. It's not data that the individual researcher has requested in terms of collecting it right away, but it's data that exists out there. In fact, this particular study is looking at data from about 2010 to 2015 or 2016 or something like that. So data that's been collected a few years ago. You can go out and get that type of data. In this case, the research was able to identify particular officers who have deployed from a particular location, looking at the number of dependents they have, going to another source to get the data on those dependent children, looking at the grades for those children, any disciplinary issues they had, the number of deployments of the parent, the length of those deployments, the age of the children, and many, many other variables. And then doing some statistical analysis and comparing those children with children of parents who did not deploy, you're able to draw some conclusions about the impact of a deployment on children and their performance. So all three of those very interesting ways to go out and gather information that we would consider to be human subject research information. So if you want to go out and collect information on human subjects, how do you go about doing that? Well, you have to come to the Institutional Review Board, the board that I chair, and we will ask you a couple of questions, and we will help you get to the answer as to whether you're doing human subject research or not. So in my decision-making process as the chair of the IRB, I ask myself whether you are doing research or not. You're doing research if two things happen. One is you are systematic, and two, if you're generalizable. So, systematic. There are lots of squishy, squirmy, fuzzy words in the IRB world, and that's just the world that I live in. But we have a way of operationally defining them in a way that helps you and helps me quite a bit. Systematic. Do you have a plan? You are going to write a thesis proposal or dissertation proposal, so guess what? You have a plan, so you are systematic. Second is, are you going to generalize? Somewhere in your thesis or dissertation or capstone project, you're going to say something like the following. I looked at this particular place, this particular group, this particular situation, and I think what I found here will be generalizable or applies to or can be extracted to this other place, time, organization, group, so on and so forth. Guess what? You're being generalizable. And because you're also being systematic, you are doing research. Congratulations, you're all going to do research here at NPS. Second question I ask myself then is that research about human subjects? So I have to take a look and see whether or not you are interacting or intervening with living individuals. If any of you want to do research on corpses, I do not care, right? Because that's not human subject research. It has to be about live individuals about whom you're gathering information. If you ask someone about their last ship or their last unit, how many people were in that unit or on that ship, what the mission was, how many times that unit or ship deployed, how long was that deployment, those are not about whom questions. Those are about what questions. About whom questions are human subject research, about what questions are not. You can ask about what questions all day long without permission from the IRB. We will help you write questions that are about what, if in fact you do not want to gather about whom information. So, but if you do want to gather information about that individual, about the challenges that he or she had, about how much responsibility they had, what went wrong, what went right, tell me about when this happened and what did you do. Those are all about whom kinds of questions, and that would require permission from the IRB. The other thing that requires permission from the IRB is if you're going to go out and use pre-collected data that involves human subjects or information that is personally identifiable. Okay, two other slippery terms. What does it mean to be private and personally identifiable? It's private if you can't Google it. That's our operating definition, right? And there's a sort of a caveat to that. You can Google it, but it has to be without any extra things like a CAC card or any special permission to get into a particular site on the internet, right? So it's private if it cannot be Googled, and it's personally identifiable, not just because there's a name or a social security number or an EDIPI number associated with it, but if I can readily ascertain the identity of an individual in that data field that you have access to, It could be hometown, date of birth, date of entry into service, marital status, number of dependents, any of those things, any combination of those things that could be put together by the researcher to identify the individual in that particular data set. That means it's personally identifiable, all right? So it's human subject research if it's both private and personally identifiable. So, recap. Systematic and generalizable means you're doing research, gathering information about whom, or information that is private and personally identifiable. Those things are considered human subject research. That doesn't mean you can't do it. That just means there's a couple more steps to go through. And we're here to help you through that process. So common types of things that are done here at MPS include surveys, interviews, focus groups, questionnaires, equipment testing on people. Sometimes you want to audio or video record people for interviews. That could involve human subject research. And then the archive data mining is the pre-collected data that I already mentioned. It doesn't make a difference if you're getting your master's degree here at MPS, at Stanford, at Georgia Tech, at University of wherever. There are IRBs that exist all over the country. So there's nothing special about what we do here except that we also follow DOD and Department of the Navy rules in addition to the federal rules that apply, and we can help you through that. You don't need to know them, we know them, and we'll help you through them. There's a little bit of additional online training that's required, and there's an approval process that takes about 3 weeks. So just be aware that when you're getting ready, and that'll come up in your thesis proposal process. You'll identify a need to collect data in some way. Your advisors will know what to do, hopefully, and they'll put you in the right direction. Some things that you can do and should not do in terms of IRB approval. So what you can do without IRB approval is you can discuss thesis topics with people. You can talk to your neighbors, your pets, your children, whoever you want. It doesn't make a difference. It's not, you haven't begun the systematic process yet. You can go to a conference and talk to a speaker who just talked about something relevant to your topic, and you can walk up to that speaker and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this for my thesis. Here's my research question. What do you think? Not human subject research. If you ask them, would you be in my survey, or could I interview you? You have now started doing human subject research because you've recruited them, and recruitment is part of the whole process of conducting human subject research, all right? You can interview people, but only if you're doing about what kinds of questions. And I really strongly recommend that you come and ask us if the questions you're about to ask are about what or about whom. Because too often, students make mistakes, and after you've done that interview, it's too late for you to get permission retroactively. Some things that you cannot do, I already mentioned, you cannot recruit beforehand. You can't go back and get information, get a retroactive approval. If in doubt, ask the IRB. And we have a way that we actually have you do that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. What happens if you start doing human subject research and you haven't got permission from the IRB? Mostly bad stuff, okay? Mostly bad stuff. And you're going to get caught because Dr. Levitt's fine, outstanding thesis processors know to read through every thesis, every word of every thesis. How do they do that? I don't know. I'm glad they're doing it. And they will come across your thesis and they will say, they did an interview, or they collected data, or they used pre-collected data. I wonder if they've got permission from the IRB to do that. That's probably one of the first things that comes through their mind. So they call up the IRB and say, hey, student so-and-so did this. Do you have any paperwork that says that they came to you and you gave them permission to do that? And we say, no. And then the next thing we say is, let's type up an email and send it to you and tell you to stop your research and put your thesis on hold, and you don't get to graduate on time, and so on and so forth, right? It's just nasty for everybody. So please, please, please come and ask us if you want to do anything like that, okay? If you want to do interviews, focus groups, questionnaires, pre-collected data, any of that stuff, please come to us. Each of you will fill out a package that will be part of your thesis proposal. In that thesis proposal, there should be an IRB student research checklist. If you check any of these things yes, right here, you're going to need to come to us and tell us what you're doing, and we will help you decide whether it's human subject research or not. All right? If you check no to all those things, and later on you say that you have changed your mind, then you need to come back to the IRB, and we will then talk again about whether or not this wrinkle in your thesis process has changed, whether or not you're doing human subject research or not. Okay? Now, two important things to leave you with. One is you cannot make the determination as to whether something you're doing is human subject research or not. Your professors cannot. Your advisor cannot. There are only 3 people on campus that are allowed to make that determination, one of whom is standing before you today. The other 2 are my vice chairs. The 3 of us, by Department of the Navy policy, are the only ones that are allowed to make that determination. So please don't make it yourself. And if your advisor says, oh, that's not human subject research, just respectfully say, well, I'm going to check with the IRB anyway, just to make sure. Okay? Second thing I want to leave you with is what it says on the bottom, cooperate and graduate. That does not mean on a take-home exam you and your friend can work together if it's individual work. All right? That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is throughout the course of your tenure here at MPS, you're going to see on the student muster page or flyers around campus or emails that you get, someone is going to ask you to come to their lab and do something, or to fill out this survey, or can I interview you about some special experience that you've had. Please don't just say no and delete the email or walk away, because at some point around 18 months or 12 months from now, you're going to be that person asking for someone to help you. So help them now. And a couple classes from now, a couple quarters from now, there'll be students sitting right in your seat that I will say the exact same thing, and hopefully they will help you. So cooperate and graduate.